if you want to learn how to shade, you have to start by practicing a value scale. This video will show you 2 basic drawing techniques. First, how to use a pencil to create a 6-step value scale. Then, how to use those 6 values to shade or go from light to dark in a sphere to make it look 3-dimensional. This is a must if you want to learn how to draw, and I'm going to walk you through step-by-step how to shade. If you love learning about art, hit that subscribe button so you never miss one of my art tutorials. We are going to start with a value scale. Value refers to the lightness or darkness of an object. And start by drawing a box, and it doesn't have to be perfect, but you want to make sure your thumb can fit inside of it. The reason why I say this is you want to practice shading larger sections. It's easier to go smaller at first, but not to get all of those values in there. So we're going to start with our darkest value first, and we're going to call this black. So with your pencil, you're going to press down as hard as you can without breaking your lead or ripping through your paper. So even though it's not black, you want it to be as dark as your pencil can possibly go. So for our value scale, this will be our darkest value, and we'll label this number 1. We are going from dark to light, so your next section needs to be about the same size, and this is going to be our darkest gray. So if number 1 is black, this is dark gray. So you can already see it's lighter. I am pressing down, but I'm not pressing down as much, and I won't overlap quite as much either. I'm holding up the paper so you can see how dark number 1 actually is. I know the lighting kind of has a halo on top of that darkest gray, and I'll go ahead and admit I love shading dark. It's harder for me to not be heavy-handed and not press down as hard. So you'll see me kind of going back and forth and adjusting my values as I go, but this second value is still really dark. If we end up having 5 or 6 values, it's darkest on your first 2. So here it is with the light not giving it a glare, and I'm going to go ahead and label this value number 2, darkest gray. So our third value is going to be your medium gray. So just like you've done before, you want it to be the same size. I always have students that do the shading tornado, so it's like really big for the first value and then it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And so when doing a value scale, do each value the same size so you get the practice of shading and how it feels to shade at that level of value. So think of a value scale just like if you were playing in the marching band or you were playing an instrument. A scale is practicing a sequence. So with drawing, you're practicing shading. This isn't like, let's hang this up in the art show. This is practicing for your drawing that's to come. So you can see with my third value here, medium gray, it has a really nice flow. It's about to get difficult for me because now we're going on to our light and lightest gray. So number 4, we're going to call it light gray. So it's not the lightest gray, but it's getting there. And this is not a fancy drawing pencil. It's not smooth. It's just something that's on the school supply list, something I have laying around. So I have to kind of go back and adjust levels or values 3. And I really need to go back to value 2 because that first value is really dark and there's kind of a big jump there. So for value 4, our light gray, I did a pretty good job. It's pretty smooth. And now I'm going to move on to the hardest value for me, and that's lightest gray. If I had a really nice drawing pencil, this would be much easier. And I am going to show you a little trick in just a minute so that you can have smooth shading. I do find it easier if I just continued shading from value 4 to value 5. Sometimes it's easier if you don't pick up your pencil, and you can use your eraser to kind of pull any value if you get it too dark. Another trick is that you can use a tissue just lightly to kind of blend your color, or not your color, to blend your pencil so that it has nice shading. So I'm going to go back and darken some of my levels. Looking back, that jump from 1 to 2 is still really intense. I should go back and darken it, but spoiler alert, I don't even notice it until I'm editing this video. So this is 5 values, and what I'm going to do next is I'm going to cheat. And this last value here, I'm just going to leave it completely blank. So the 5th value for this is difficult. You can see me smoothing it because it has to be so light in value that the next step is white. And that can be really difficult to achieve. So a tissue or a Kleenex can help you kind of smooth that gray, but don't overblend it or then you'll just have one gray mess that doesn't show value. So now let's put our value scale into practice. So if you were warming up, say for a game, if you were an athlete, you would run drills or you would do something to practice before you jump in. So think of your value scale as warming up for your drawing. I'm tracing the bottom of my hydro flask, and yes, my students love to make that noise at me when I'm drinking out of it, and we're going to shade a sphere. So my students always get very stressed out about making a perfect circle, but remember, there's nothing perfect in life, so it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. If you have a compass or you have a way to make a perfect circle, awesome, but the point here is that you're not shading a tiny circle the size of a marble. You want this to be pretty large because I would love to see all 5 or 6, if you're counting white, of these values. So to shade a sphere, you're actually not going to shade straight across with a straight line. You want the object to appear round because a sphere is a 3-dimensional circle. So what I mapped out is I just drew an arrow to show you that the light is shining from this direction, and this crescent moon, you see how it looks like a moon? That is going to be shaded with our number 1 darkest value, which we're calling black, even though it's really just a dark gray. So just like you did before, you're going to press down and you're going to overlap and you're going to get the darkest value that you possibly can without ripping through your paper or breaking your pencil. Now, although you saw me draw a line for this crescent moon, I'm not going to do that every time because you don't want it to look like it has stripes. You want it to have a gradual flow of shading and value so it looks 3-dimensional. You'll notice I did the same thing with my value scale. I didn't draw out 6 boxes. I just tried to make sure each one was about the same size and shape. So I'm drawing the first one so that you can see the shape, but we're not going to draw it every time because you don't want it to look like it has stripes. And yes, this is more of a challenge. This is leveling up. A value scale is straight across. I'm not going to say it's easy, but it is so much easier than shading a sphere. Looking good, that dark value's in there. It has that nice crescent moon shape. Now it's time to go for our darkest gray. So I'm going to kind of map out where I'm going to put this value, but again, I'm not going to do this every time because I don't want it to have stripes. And if you notice, the circle continues. So the circle just gets pushed towards the light source. So you're still going to shade with that crescent moon in a rounded formation. And the sphere is still a circle. The circle is just going to get smaller and smaller and smaller until it hits the light. So with this one, let me touch up that line a little bit. I'm pressing down and I might go a fade here from value 2, so dark gray to a medium gray. And the important part is to blend the 2 values together. So you keep hearing me say the word stripes. You don't want it to look as if it's each value has its own section. They need to flow into each other. So where the 2 values meet is going to be a very important part of shading your sphere so it looks 3-dimensional. You can turn your paper. Just make sure you're not shading straight across on the line, but you're curving around to get that illusion of 3 dimensions. So with this value, I'm going back into my first darkest value and trying to have a great progression. There should be about 3 values here. Black, darkest gray, and then we're getting in our medium gray. I'm going to speed things up here, and if you're thinking, wow, she's shading really fast, I sped things up twice the actual speed that I'm drawing. So if you think I'm going fast, I'm going twice as fast as I normally would. But you get the idea, you're going back and forth. And so let's move things along a little bit. And once you feel comfortable with your 3 darkest values, it's time to go light. So I struggle with the lightest value. In my value scale, I mentioned that. So I recommend not picking up your pencil and just going from 4 to 5 to 6 with your values without picking up your pencil so that you can have that progression of value. You don't have to map it out and make lines. And this is the point of the drawing where I wish I had my fancy, expensive drawing pencils because they're so much smoother. Now, I like to use inexpensive art supplies to show you that you can use really inexpensive art supplies and still make really great art. But I will say it's hard to get not a scratchy line with this style of pencil. So you can see their circle, as I mentioned, is getting smaller and smaller and moving towards the light source. And using a Kleenex or a tissue, in my opinion, is going to bring all of these values together. So I'm doing most of my work with the pencil itself. You do not want to rely on your finger, on a blending stick, even on a Kleenex to do your shading for you, because then it's going to be all the same gray and all the same value. Your eraser is a great tool. That freebie value number 6, you want to make sure that that white is in there. That's your highlight. And a highlight is the lightest part of an object where light reflects. And if you want something to look really 3D, get that highlight in there and make sure you have a nice dark value. So at this point, I'm going to very lightly use my tissue to smudge a little bit my lightest gray into my white. If I did this on the whole sphere, all of my hard work would disappear and it'd be all the same value. So I'm using it just to blend my values like 4, 5, and 6. And I'm using my eraser to touch up my edges because I didn't even trace a perfect circle. And you always want to go back with your eraser and get that pure white value. It looks really awkward like that. So you can use your eraser or your pencil or go back in with that tissue so it's not just a white circle. It needs to flow. Just like you didn't draw lines to separate your values, you don't want your values separate. You want them to work together. And it definitely does take practice. Use your eraser to touch up your edges. And remember, shading a sphere is not as easy as a value scale. This is putting into practice your hard work with your value scale. We're not going to add a shadow or anything like that. Drawing exercise is all about shading by applying at least 5 values to create something that looks 3-dimensional. And I have to say, it's so much fun when you apply these values because it really looks 3D, like you just pick this up off of your paper and walk away with it. Be a perfectionist. Go back and make sure that you have great flow with your values and that each value is on there. Check your work. See if you can find 5 values. And remember, white is a freebie. It's just the white of your paper. All right, shading practice is done. Thank you so much for sticking around and learning how to shade with me. And if you're interested in more drawing tutorials that just use a pencil, check these out.